Hello and welcome to our session today, which is our second session of the Successful Future series, where today we'll be looking at why we believe it's really important that we teach the humanities to our primary school pupils. Now, this is the content of what we're going to cover today. So we're going to look at what the humanities actually encompasses, the subjects which are contained within, how the humanities fits into curriculum for Wales, how we define each of our subjects within the humanities, and how we can make our connections between them without losing that unique element. So just take a few moments to think about how you would answer this question if someone said to you, "What are the humanities?" And your sentence started with, "The humanities is the study of." Take 10 seconds to just think about what comes into mind here. Okay, I'm sure we will have come up with lots of very different answers, but there's probably some kind of connecting theme linking all of these together. It might be that the humanities is the study of people in the present, past, and in the possible future. That's just one example of a definition. There are probably going to be lots and lots of others that are much better than my example here. Just a quick reminder, this is what we're talking about when we talk about the humanities AOLE, or Area of Learning Experience. When we look at it, there are some subjects that are quite familiar. So history, geography, religion, values and ethics, those are the subjects that perhaps we'd expect to see here. But the new ones, the unusual ones, would be business studies and social sciences, such as sociology, psychology and anthropology. Now, these are the subjects that I think are going to be the greatest challenge for our primary school colleagues, because traditionally these aren't the subjects that someone would have studied as part of their degree in order to qualify and prepare themselves for teaching in a primary school. There are some rare exceptions where people will have used a sociology degree or a psychology degree perhaps to build up their subject knowledge of the development of a child, but it's far rarer. So if you are able to offer expertise in any of these areas, then I think that's a real plus for you when you move into your placement. Now, it's really important that we remember that the four purposes are what should drive the curriculum. And we're looking for an integrated disciplinary and multidisciplinary approach where we've got all of these subjects linking together to create a better understanding of the world around us. Now, humanities provides a range of lenses through which we can understand and process the experiences of humanity. It helps us to gain self-awareness and an understanding of our place and that of Wales within the world. Humanities includes learning about the factors that influence society, the environment, culture, human behaviour, and the relationship between people and the natural and social environment in Wales and in the wider world. Now, the humanities disciplines use a process of inquiry that's central to developing a critical mindset. This explores the human experience through historical, geographical, religious, non-religious, political, economic, and societal or sociological lenses. So you can see that humanities covers an awful lot within that umbrella term. Now, your information about the humanities will be on Hub. If you go to the link here, Curriculum for Wales Hub at government.wales, you'll find that all of the resources that you need are covered on that website. Now, if we look at specific subjects for a few moments, when we look at geography, we have some really interesting quotations here. So Michael Palin, "Geography is a fusion of the power of the imagination and the hard truths of science." So that's a really interesting quotation. If you have a look at that, think carefully about what that would mean to you. And I'm also going to pick up on Andrew Goody's quotation here. What other subject tells us so much about the great issues of the age? It's really interesting when you think about that quote and you start going through the subjects in your brain and thinking, well, perhaps this one, perhaps that one. But quite often you will come back to thinking, yes, I think perhaps geography is the one that links in best here. Okay, so if we were asking a geography teacher, why would you teach geography? These are the answers they would come up with. So personal development, it's great to develop these life skills, this understanding of how to read a map, how to understand to get from one place to another, how to look at perhaps a geographical landscape and be able to tell people how it was developed, how it's changed over time and why it looks this way. There are some other areas as well. If we look at here, we can see why teaching geography is really important. Now, these are some great photographs here. So if you were teaching your geography lesson to, let's say you're 3, 4, 5, you might want to put one of these images up on the board and just ask pupils to explain what they think is happening, the questions they'd want to know about the scene, if they could predict what's going to happen next, or if they could talk about why this image was actually taken, why the photographer thought it was important. Now, this is a brilliant image. This comes from one of the poorest areas within the towns within one of the cities within Brazil, and you can see what a difference an environment can make and a minor change to an environment. This is one of the poorest areas and possibly one of the most dangerous areas. But when you look at this image, it's a really beautiful picture because this effort has been made to make this environment look much more pleasant. So again, it's the kind of questions you could ask. Why has this happened? Where is this photograph taken? What's it actually showing? When was it taken? How was this actually decided upon, this idea of painting these wonderful buildings, these mixture of buildings in these incredible colours? Now, history. I have to confess here, I've put much too large a quotation here, talking about why history is important. I think if I was going to sum it up as a history teacher, I would say history is really important because it's about telling stories about what's happened in the past. Hopefully we can learn from those stories, but human nature means that quite often we don't. But children love hearing stories. They love finding out about the things that have happened, which sort of shape the future and explain why people perhaps behave the way they do. And historians are generally really good storytellers. They're the kind of people who can talk about perhaps Henry VIII and his 6 wives and have a classroom listening to every single word, waiting to find out what happens next. So if you're quite nosy and you like finding out about people, history is really the subject for you. So here I've put a little bit more information down about why we should be teaching history. One thing I would say is that the study of history builds experience in dealing with and assessing various kinds of evidence. The sorts of evidence historians use in shaping the most accurate pictures of the past that they can. History helps us to interpret the statements of past political leaders. For example, that's just one kind of evidence, and it helps form the capacity to distinguish between the objective and the self-serving among statements made by present-day politicians. It also helps us to combine different types of evidence: public statements, private records, numerical data, visual materials, and this develops the child's ability to make a coherent argument based upon a variety of data. But let's have a look at my next image. So this is really why I'm interested in history. I like finding out about why society has behaved in the way it has. So we've got a number of images here which I'm sure you'll recognise. So if I start in the bottom right hand side, here we have the suffragette movement and the colours there representing the movement. Alongside it we have an image which has been taken from Dublin, and this shows a statue, a collection of statues that's been created to really ensure people don't forget about the events of the Irish famine and the devastating impact that had upon the country. The next figure across, I'm sure, is one that many of you will have studied for GCSE history. So it's Hitler and the rise of the Nazis. It seems to be still one of the most popular subjects for teachers to teach at GCSE. And unfortunately, that does mean that youngsters will have quite a narrow view of history. So it's important that we try to make sure that they realise that the history of the world is more than those 12 years that happened in Germany and the effect that had on the rest of Europe and the wider world. In the bottom corner, we have the Emancipation Act, so the freedom of slaves, which happened in the UK before it happened in the United States. So this is a momentous event, and this shows how it was marked at the time. On the top left-hand corner, we have a modern-day photograph, and this is commemorating the Stonewall riots that happened in the United States, which really marked the start of the gay revolution and the LGBTQ+ movement fighting for equality. Now, an image in the centre, I'm sure some of you will have covered before, the Rebecca riots, often described as one of the most credible portions of Welsh history, because this is an example of an attempt when we try to change the situation and we're extremely successful. So men dressing in women's clothing to disguise their bodies and their appearance were able to force the government to reduce the tolls on roads that were making their lives incredibly difficult. Now again, if we're looking at the why, where, what, when and how, the French Revolution in this image is a brilliant example to think about. Studying events such as the French Revolution helps us to shape our understanding of why the present world is the way it is. The French Revolution was perhaps one of the most startling, exciting and terrifying periods in European history. People and governments throughout Europe trembled at the thought that it could happen here. Many of our ideas about politics and democracy were developed during this revolution. Now, if we're talking about religion, values and ethics, it's important that children and young people develop these skills. It helps them to explore religion and human experience. It should help them to develop attitudes of open-mindedness, empathy and respect where appropriate when thinking about the viewpoints and lifestyles of others. Now here's a clip from a religious education lesson.
I see pupils tackling subjects like this every day, and I always think to myself, wow, I don't have the answers to any of these questions, and that is exhilarating. There's nothing more exciting in life than a mystery, and let's face it, we don't always focus on that kind of thing, particularly not the big ones. It's easier just to cruise through the day on autopilot, not really thinking about anything. But that wasn't working for me. I wanted something more, something beyond the ordinary. I always knew that I wanted to make some sort of genuine contribution to society, to help people. But I also wanted to help myself, to be stimulated, to be challenged. And young minds have a funny knack for that sort of thing.
What is the difference between Jesus in the Bible and Jesus in other scriptures?
Now, it's safe to say that I'm challenged pretty much every day. I'm always on my toes, tackling the next big question. I can't say that I planned to get into RE teaching. The only thing I ever planned to be was a vet. But as soon as I started reading up on it, I knew that this was the job for me. I don't consider myself religious, but there's an academic side to RE that's fascinating to me. The idea of approaching these huge concepts from an intellectual point of view is one I developed a real passion for. It's a subject that's easy to be passionate about. I spend my days helping these tirelessly curious kids get to grips with the big mysteries of life, examining spiritual beliefs, walking them through abstract philosophical concepts, and getting into spirited debates over morals and ethics. We live in a dynamic, ever-changing society, full of different perspectives, beliefs and cultures. Learning about these things helps the pupils in my classroom to see the world more clearly and helps them develop a genuine understanding about the world and the people in it. And that understanding will help them to shape the society of the future, a better society. I can't think of anything more rewarding than to have played some part in that. The big questions are never going to go away, but there'll always be people willing to take them on. Because this is one career that's guaranteed to take you way beyond the ordinary. Maybe it's the one for you.
Okay, so you saw what happens in a religious education classroom there, or an RVE classroom in secondary schools. You can see that there's a whole variety of different topics and subjects that you'll be teaching. And that will, of course, filter down into the primary school as well. So you will be teaching these same subjects, perhaps not in as much depth, but you'll certainly find that the children really enjoy these lessons. Now, as I said earlier, one of the things that we have to look at is business studies and how this can be integrated into our humanities. So straight away, I'm sure some of you already have some ideas. You'll be thinking about, well, just looking at the images here. When we look at these images, what springs to mind? So how could we involve our youngsters and get them to develop start to develop an understanding of what business studies actually involves? Now, when we talk about social studies, here we're really talking about the study of a society, and this includes issues such as equality and diversity. It's looking at how societies are formed and how they survive, and what we can do to improve and sustain the societies we live in a local, national and global way. Have a look at this video and think how you would use this perhaps to introduce the topic or the study of social studies within your classroom.
Hey, line up! Line up! Everybody line up! We're about to race! Everybody line up! Shoulder to shoulder! Take off your backpacks! Basketball, line up! We're about to race! Hey, we are racing for a $100 bill. The winner of this race will take this. A $100 bill. Before I say go, I'm going to make a couple statements. If those statements apply to you, I want you to take 2 steps forward. If those statements don't apply to you, I want you to stay right where you're at. Take 2 steps forward if both of your parents are still married. Take 2 steps forward if you grew up with a father figure in the home. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a private education. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a free tutor growing up. Take 2 steps forward if you've never had to worry about your cell phone being shut off. Take 2 steps forward if you've never had to help mom or dad with the bills. Take 2 steps forward if it wasn't because of your athletic ability. You don't have to pay for college. Take 2 steps forward if you never wondered where your next meal was going to come from. I want you guys up here in the front just to turn around and look. Every statement I've made has nothing to do with anything any of you have done. Has nothing to do with decisions you've made. Everything I have said has nothing to do with what you've done. We all know these people up here have a better opportunity to win this $100. Does that mean these people back here can't race? No. We would be foolish to not realize we've been given more opportunity. We don't want to recognize that we've been given a head start. But the reality is we have. Now, there's no excuse. They still got to run their race. You still got to run your race. But whoever wins this $100, I think it'd be extremely foolish of you not to utilize that and learn more about somebody else's story. Because the reality is, if this was a fair race and everybody was back on that line, I guarantee you some of these black dudes would smoke all of you. And it's only because you have this big of a head start that you're possibly going to win this race called life. That is a picture of life, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing you've done has put you in the lead that you're in right now. When I say go, on your mark, get set, go!
Okay, so I think when you look at that video, you can see there are some really powerful messages there, and it's the kind of video that would engage youngsters. Lots of questions you could ask about this. Okay, now I've come to the task that we're looking at today. I've listed the instructions here on the left-hand side. What I'd love to see you do is to create a colourful mind map which defines and explores the content of each of our subjects within the humanities. So we're looking at all of them, please. So we're looking at geography, history, RVE, business studies and the social studies. Now there are some possible themes here we've put down. Possibly humans and the environment, or cultural identity, diversity and heritage, borders and migration, or anything else that you can think of that you could use as a starting block. So the first kind of idea that you develop out from. So this would be your theme that you're going to cover. And within that theme, you're going to hit each of these different subjects within the humanities. You may want to choose your own theme or your own idea. That's absolutely great if you can. Some examples that we've looked at in the last couple of weeks will be oceans. That was one group's starting topic. Another group looked at LGBTQ plus rights. So looking at the way in which society has changed over the past, let's say, 20 years perhaps. Another group looked at Black Lives Matter. So how this movement has really changed society very recently, or hopefully changed society. Another group looked at women's rights. Another group looked at Easter. So as I've said, there are lots and lots of different subjects or topics that you can use as your starting point and think about how this could connect with all of the humanities. If you do manage to create a mind map, it would be great if you could send that through to me. So if you could email it through, I'd love to see that. Okay. Now I'm just going to finish off by putting a list of resources here that you might find useful. So if you look at them, you can see that some of them have links, and these will be available for you to have a look at and get you started with this activity. Okay, thank you for listening today. Bye-bye.